Yeah, we call it the hidden gigaton, to your point. And it is because there isn't a lot of visibility and there isn't a lot of understanding about this particular category of superpollutants. And superpollutants have a kind of a wide category. It's a wide category, right? It goes all the way from methane from landfills to refrigeration gases, esoteric fluorinated gases like SF6 and other horrible gases, which have super high GWPs. But they all have one thing in common, and is that they are outside. They have outsized impact in a very short period of time. So, to your point, Rene, half of the heating in the atmosphere so far has been super pollutant related. And the thing about super pollutants that is so hard for me to live with, right, is that you can't take it out. It cannot be removed. Unlike carbon, it cannot be removed from the atmosphere. So you have to stop it before it gets there is no option.
So welcome back, everybody, to This Week in Carbon. My name is Rene Velasquez. I'm filling in for Eddie Smith, who's under the weather this week. But I'm really excited for this conversation today. It's with Fritz Troller from Therm. Fritz, it's a pleasure to see you once again. It's been a long time since we spoke last. I was mentioning to you before we started recording that I spoke to your team not that far back, a couple of months ago. We had such an interesting conversation that I said we've got to get Fritz on the show and we've got to talk about a very interesting topic that I think doesn't get enough attention, which is talking about super pollutants. And you sit within this space. So can you just give our audience, just for their benefit, a little bit of introduction about yourself and about the business, and then let's do a deeper dive. How's that?
Yeah, sure. And first of all, Rene, thank you for having me. It has been a couple of years, and in our carbon world, that seems like a very long time because things change so quick. But I'm happy to be on this great podcast. I've been looking forward to it. I've watched in the background with your success, and I'm happy that you have me on. So I appreciate it. So thank you.
Thank you. I don't know about success. There's no accolades here, but all we're doing is we're just trying to do the good work of spreading the word around carbon. Sometimes it feels a little bit like a
consider that
thankless
success,
task,
actually.
Yeah, I think so too. It's such a pertinent topic, and so we just continue through regardless. But thankfully for our audience, like, we're getting a lot of interest from a wide range of different folks, and that's how we judge success.
Yeah, great. From a background standpoint, back to your question. So previous to founding Therm, my partners and I had a real passion around climate and energy efficiency, and we started a company. This is my fourth startup, and the two before this were in the energy services, energy savings, energy efficiency category. We were in the commercial and industrial side, but we were super passionate. Our last company was founded in 2005. We were very passionate about energy issues, climate issues, and the environment at large. We built that business into a substantial business. We were in the C&I category. I think we were the 6th or 7th largest ESCO, energy savings company, working with commercial and industrial customers. Along the way, we founded a manufacturing company because, as an interesting aside, we had a particular niche in large food spaces, right? Food distribution, food warehouses, and founded an LED lighting company, connected services company along the way. And we sold those companies back in 2000 and 2017 and stuck around for a few years to, as an earnout and to stay with the company and make the transition. We sold those companies, one company to EDF, who's the largest utility in the world in France. And the other company was sold to Osram. The manufacturing company was sold to Osram in 2017. So as I said, we stuck around for a few years, still with this path.
You didn't sail away into the sunset. You decided
still. It's
funny. Talk to me about
Rene.
That entrepreneur's kind of, desire. I keep saying I said to my team before we launched Velaterra, I said, I've got one more startup in me. I don't
And
know how
then
much energy I've got, and now it's like I'm just enjoying it so much. It's fun, but it's also scary, right? It's the old adage of the
yeah,
entrepreneur: you chew glass and stare into the abyss, and then things happen along the way. So
yeah,
talk
yeah,
to me
yeah.
about that.
Well,
So
it's an
what brought you
interesting.
back onto the entrepreneur's world after
Yeah,
selling?
so unfortunately, I don't have many hobbies other than my children and my grandchildren, who I love desperately. But the other part is I still had a passion, and my partners and I still had a passion around climate and the things that were going on, and saw a moment in time that we could still make a difference, and that was still a passion that kind of ran within us. So we started Therm back in 2021, soon after we left the EDF based business. And what we did is what all good startups do, right? We picked up the phone, and gosh, I really wish there was AI back then, because made dozens and just hundreds of phone calls to suppliers and customers and buyers and all sorts of folks, mainly in the food supply chain, which is where we focused before, and started asking open-ended questions like, what's your biggest problem? What are issues that are confronting you? Tell me about those issues. And with every one of those phone calls, I recorded all the details, which AI would have done much easier today than it was 5, 6 years ago. But a common theme actually arose over time, and it was that there was this in the food supply chain. There was this pressure to become more environmentally sustainable. And the AIM Act had just been the AIM Act had just been signed by the Trump administration on its way out in 2021, early 2021. And so the food manufacturers, the distributors, the retailers were all reeling, trying to figure out how these big refrigeration systems that they have were going to convert over time, because the excuse me, the financial difference between the choices that they would have to make were substantial. And so we saw an opening for carbon finance, Rene. Luckily, we drafted behind some existing methodologies, so it didn't involve building new methodologies, which, as you well know, is a long and tedious task. And so we could get the revenue pretty quickly and build a company. So raised money from a few folks that had partners who had invested in us and my partner and I along the way over the last 30 years, really pretty successfully. Folks we knew very well from the Boston area. So we raised money, started hiring some folks, and built the business kind of around this food supply chain idea, and really dug in on refrigeration and refrigerants, and came to the conclusion that was quite shocking to us all, that these refrigeration systems are super leaky. They leak on average 25%. The EPA tells us 25% every single year. And that the GWP, the global warming potential of these refrigeration gases, was outrageous. It was, anywhere from 1,200 to 8,000.
Yeah.
GWPs. The gases in themselves are not bad as long as they don't leak, as long as they don't get out in the atmosphere. But the problem is they do, and it's
Mhm.
inherent in that kind of a business. So anyway, that's how we started the business back in 2021.
Obviously, like, I love that journey because essentially it's client led. I think taking the time to listen, whether now AI can compress that or not, I think I've got some thoughts on that, but maybe we'll come back to that. I don't want to take that to a side, but effectively you took the time to listen to what the clients were looking for, and you tried to understand what the problems that they had, and then try to come up with a business to provide a solution to address that. And that's the best way to find that product market fit. Because oftentimes people try to the reverse. They have a solution, they try to fit that solution into and looking around for problems. It's the old adage of having a hammer looking for nails. In this way, you looked around, you saw a whole bunch of nails, and thought, "Hey guys, why don't we invent a hammer?" So I really like that. It's just a much more logic driven way. But it's interesting that you stumbled obviously upon that, given obviously the correlation with previous business. To your point, super pollutants, they don't get a lot of, let's say, press time. They don't get a lot of kind of airtime with regards to the storytelling side. But as you said, it's this invisible leak of these gases throughout, refrigerants, etc., that actually can have significant global warming potential. I can't remember where I read the number, but I think it's measured in a gigaton potential, right? In terms of potential for emissions. Maybe you can correct me on that. Can you give us a context around what is that global warming potential of refrigerants and that are potentially leaking out into the atmosphere, and what can be done, obviously, to avoid those?
Yeah, we call it the hidden gigaton, to your point. And it is because there isn't a lot of visibility and there isn't a lot of understanding about this particular category of super pollutants. And super pollutants have a kind of a wide category. It's a wide category, right? It goes all the way from methane from landfills to refrigeration gases, esoteric fluorinated gases like SF6 and other horrible gases, which have super high GWPs. But they all have one thing in common, is that they are outside. They have outsized impact in a very short period of time. So, to your point, Rene, half of the heating in the atmosphere so far has been pollutant related. And the thing about super pollutants that is so hard for me to live with, right, is that you can't take it out. It cannot be removed. Unlike carbon, it cannot be removed from the atmosphere. So you have to stop it before it gets there is no option. There's no
To destroy
secondary.
it once it's been diffused into the atmosphere. Yeah, that's
Well,
a
to
very
remove
salient
it
point.
once it's in the
Yeah.
atmosphere, right? There is no CDR for super pollutants, and that's really hard for us. And the particular category that we're going after, which is the refrigerant category, generally, we do some methane abatement as well, procedures, but we do a lot of refrigerant work. The analogy that I used yesterday in a meeting, Rene, is there are solutions for destroying those gases through furnaces and things like that once they've gone through their cycle and are being replaced. The problem is it's like the 20-year-old Cadillac, right? You have a 20-year-old Cadillac that burns gas through 20, and then at the end of its life, you say, oh, let's take the gasoline out of the Cadillac and that'll solve the problem, when it's been burning at 20,000 miles a year through that whole period. We're passionate about saying, don't put that Cadillac on the road in the first place, right? Let's give good economic choices to folks who are making these decisions related to capital expenditures, and give them the economic carbon finance to not even let that Cadillac hit the road in the first place. I shouldn't say Cadillac. Cadillac's a great brand, great great car.
No, but we understand the metaphor, like big,
Yeah,
giant American car. No, and the classic Detroit like sort of cars. No, we totally get it. It's a good analogy. Can I just come back, because obviously sometimes we talk on this show in a lot of kind of inside carbon, obviously, context, and we make an assumption that every listener understands kind of the nuances and certainly the acronyms. But so I'd like to just break it down in kind of normal speak. Can you walk us through a typical grocery store or cold storage facility, just for the audience's benefit, what's actually leaking? And then give us some context around, is it poor equipment design, maintenance gaps? Like, is it something more systemic about this? Like you gave this kind of analogy around the Cadillac, but walk us through that, what it looks like on the ground.
Sure, happy
or
to
in the
do that.
field.
Yeah, so there are 46,000 grocery stores in the U.S. and around the world. Europe has a similar profile, about 50,000 grocery stores, a little smaller in size on average. But each of those grocery stores in the United States, as an example, is about 40,000 square feet. And I'll just give you the profile of what a grocery store, and then we can talk about cold storage. But that 40,000 square foot grocery store, of which there are 45,000, has a refrigeration plant. And that refrigeration plant is usually in the back of the grocery store. And that refrigeration plant has compressors, just like your air conditioner does, has a load of refrigerant that it has to compress in order to extract heat out of the atmosphere, and then sends that liquid, that cooled liquid, through a series of miles of piping in each grocery store to cases. So those cases are either what we call medium temp cases, where you get your milk or your fresh fruit or something like that, or butter. And there are low temp cases where we get our ice cream and frozen foods. And that it does that through what's called an evaporator. You also have an evaporator in your air conditioner. All of us do, or most of us do, I should say. And so those miles and miles of tubing is where, and a compressor by its very nature is compressing the gas mechanically. There's a lot of vibration and a lot of movement. And those miles and miles of tubing, just by its very nature, has leaks. And grocers, by and large, are very sensitive to those leaks because they're leaking very expensive gas, and they don't want to leak gas. grocers have the best intentions not to leak these gases, but by its very nature, these gases just leak. And so if you take all that, you can see that there's in that little category of grocery, 60 million tons every single year gets vented into 60, the equivalent of 60 million tons of carbon dioxide gets emitted into the atmosphere. That's a massive load of carbon into our atmosphere.
Yeah, and into an increasingly smaller and smaller carbon budget.
And then you look at the cold storage category, just to be clear. Compared to the 45,000 grocery stores, there are 15,000 cold storage facilities that feed those grocery stores, feed restaurants, feed every place food is consumed or items need to be cooled. And there are 15,000 of those, and they are on average about, 200,000 to 300,000 square feet. So much, much larger. And so the entire food supply chain, you go back to the manufacturers where they have to, the food manufacturers and processors as well. So it is a very large, very, very large climate issue.
Yeah. Okay. And so kind of dumb question here, because I've obviously never been out into the back of a grocery store's refrigerant area, like you said, the back, the word that you used, but or into the cold storage facilities. But how are those leaks actually determined or found, and how are they monitored? Just
question.
Curious from a scientific perspective, like how are you guys actually catching these things?
Yeah, so I'll give you sort of the way it was and the way it is. So back in the day, as archaic as it sounds, Rene, people would take a handheld, like a laptop, technicians would throw it over their shoulder, and they'd have a laptop, right? It wasn't a laptop. It was a gas detector, and they use infrared light. And they would go down those lines they knew there was a leak because the reservoir of gas goes down. They don't know where it is. So they take these infrared beams and go through miles and miles of tubing and compressors and evaporators and try and find those leaks. That was years ago. Today, we now have very interesting new AI and machine learning kinds of applications that have predictive analysis and produce like digital twins. So you can do comparative analysis. And those are very sophisticated leak detection systems that can pinpoint where those leaks are. Those systems are expensive. And so to get our grocers to use those more efficiently, we have a leak detection methodology that, in addition to incenting grocers to change out their refrigeration equipment to more natural refrigerants or 0 or 1 GWP refrigerants, we have an additional methodologies that says if you can't afford to replace it, or you can't afford to build a new facility with low GWP gas, then invest in this high-tech leak detection equipment. And we have carbon credits in the voluntary carbon market that apply directly towards that application to do leak detection.
Yeah, great. So there's the market effectively providing a solution. And so I wanted to do a deeper dive in terms of the economics here. So essentially, the asset owners and effectively the operators of these cold storage and grocery stores with the refrigerant units are incentivized in two ways, it sounds. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but obviously there's a material input, which is the actual cost of the refrigerant gases themselves, because as you said, the actual gas themselves are not cheap, so they don't want to lose their investment into their asset, right? Or into their stock. That's one. And so they want to prevent leaks that way. And now the other way is that we've actually created a carbon credit for the fact that they're actually preserving and maintaining the infrastructure. So it's a positive incentive in this case through the sale of those carbon credits. Am I correct in that summary?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Dumb question here, but is there another incentive is there another penalty that from compliance and from regulators around the global warming impact for those super pollutants entering the atmosphere? Because obviously, there's some correlation. Some of the old refrigerants, the HFC 23s and the like, which had ozone depleting, and we talk about ozone depleting substances, right? But Montreal Protocol dealt with a lot of these, and so is there some sort of regulatory punitive damage for actually leaking these into the atmosphere or not yet?
Yes, there are some more proactive states in the United States and countries around the world who have taken some action. California is an example. In California, for example, if you build a new cold storage or a new grocery store, the GWP of that new system has to be essentially be a natural refrigerant, a ultra low GWP refrigerant like ammonia or interestingly enough, CO2, which is a great refrigerant, actually, strangely enough. So there are there are certain regulatory environments where and compliance markets where this is now regulated. I'd use the example, Rene. The best example I think in the world right now is the Canadian market, where
Right. So what goes on there?
the Canadians have done just a wonderful job. The E-Trip have stood up provincial markets like the BC market, the British Columbia market, and what's called the OBPS, which is their national carbon market. And it reflects the industrial carbon tax, not the personal carbon tax. A really important issue for our friends in Canada. But what they've done is built up a compliance market at very attractive prices that have allowed carbon action to accelerate, and they've done it in a way that's really productive. So there are a mix of both voluntary and compliance markets around the world. Again, I would point to Canada as a great example of a compliance market that has a very very reasonable price of carbon versus the voluntary market, has some of its own, as you know, some of its own quirkiness,
Idiosyncrasies, yeah.
and really hasn't pushed the price up of carbon to a point where you can accelerate change. We'd love to have that acceleration change because in the U.S., just to give you an example, is this really a problem? Only 3.7% of grocery stores actually have embraced ultra low GWP. That's even after a lot of really hard
Wow.
work from people like, NASRC and others who have done wonderful work trying to tell people about this and work with us very closely to change that number and get it better. But it's still a big problem, and it isn't changing fast enough. Price of carbon's part of it. If the voluntary carbon market had a higher price, it would accelerate even further. We're really excited about the super pollutant tailwind that's coming through. And I point to our friends at Google and JP Morgan and others who have a month or two ago made a huge announcement with a $100 million investment in between now and 2030 specifically in super pollutants. And these are, as you would imagine, super smart folks who have studied the market in a really, really detailed way and have come to conclusions. So that hidden gigaton that we talked about before, we're hoping it doesn't stay hidden, and that with the help of folks like Google and others in the consortium that they're building, that will get more visibility, voluntary carbon prices go up, and we'll be able to solve that problem and turn that 3.7% penetration rate turn into 37%. That's what we'd love to
That's
see.
very surprisingly low penetration rate. That's actually astonishing. But as you said, there needs to be a higher price would actually create that incentive for greater participation right now.
Yeah.
No, that's interesting. So can you unpack the commercials or give us some context for the audience around that JP Morgan and Google transaction? Because obviously, when folks in the market start to hear about deal flow and continuing sort of investment from different folks, substantiates and underwrites the business case and the viability of these projects.
Well said.
Just curious if you can give some context there, and then I want to dive into the kind of the marketability and fungibility of these instruments.
Yeah, I think the details are coming out and will continue to come out. The announcement was done which I attended at the Yale Cooling Conference in early March, I think. And Google and others had a big presence there. And what we learned is that $100 million commitment is what they're calling catalytic capital. And I love your word underwriting. That's a great word, Rene, because what they want to do is they want to get others to follow, and they want to sort of be the tip of the spear, and $100 million doesn't solve the problem. Doesn't even come close to solving the problem in the super pollutants category. But what they really want to do is they want to put their catalytic capital behind that. And of that $100 million between now and 2030, Google, I believe this is right, committed that $50 million, they will do an incremental $50 million on their own as part of that $100 million commitment. So we're really, really excited that will become a significant tailwind, and that they will be able to push up prices, get more projects done, increased penetration rates in all the areas of super pollutants, methane, SF6, hydrofluorocarbons, all of these ridiculously high GWP. And the point that I sort of skipped over earlier, but I'll make it, is that the
Please.
difference between the environmental impact of these is that they have very high GWPs, and they're what are called short-lived pollutants. That means that their impact happens immediately. It doesn't happen over 100 years. It doesn't happen over 30 years. It happens immediately. And that's why the warming effect is so onerous, so ridiculously terrible. And why we're so passionate about eliminating this category of.
How long lived are some of these gases in the atmosphere? That's an interesting question, because I don't know. I know that the multiplication factors of a lot of these gases, because I've looked at this early on in my career, my first few jobs, but I don't remember how long lived they are in the atmosphere. Can you give us some context there?
Yeah, it depends on the gas, right? But I'll give you just a
Yep.
sort of a general idea. If other gases like carbon dioxide are working under a sort of a GWP 100, so over 100 years, you
Yep.
measure the effect. The equivalent to that, just to make it easier, is 20 years for these gases. It's not an exact science, and that all gases deteriorate at different rates, like but the category of fluorinated gases in our category and methane have have shorter lived, which means that impact heats us up very quickly
Yeah, for a
today,
very, very short time.
and it's possible to reverse because you can't suck super pollutants out of the air, can't remove them.
Yeah, thanks for that. And sorry to put you on the spot with the science question. Just can't shake my inner nerd. But two quick observations as it relates to this sort of underwriting, and it's fantastic to see companies like Google, JP Morgan, and others stepping into this market and understanding that they can provide essentially this catalytic signal through
Mhm.
the offtake side into the market. We want to encourage more and more corporates to come in and to provide that. It really helps to substantiate the market and then encourage others to participate. So that's the first point. But then I guess the second point I want to make is around the rationalization as to why this is an investable category. And to your point, you mentioned earlier that they have very, very, very smart teams, data centric and data focused, that have arrived at the conclusion that ozone depleting substances, refrigerants, and these other super pollutants, methane, etc., have such a significant impact that it's very important to avoid these emissions going to the atmosphere for the reasons that you've outlined. But effectively, that the monitoring and reporting and verification of those avoidance of those emissions into the atmosphere, that science is very well established, and that it's very, I won't say easy, but it's very reliable in order for the measurement and reporting of those emissions. And so unlike our cousins in the nature-based space, where there are a lot of differences with regards to the science around the counterfactual, for super pollutants, it's essentially an unimpeachable science, right? And so that shows up not just in the analysis that the buyers are undertaking, but more importantly and more scalably in the analysis that the third-party rating agencies are providing. Kind of to bring it back to the audience, to a previous episode, I spoke with Donna Lee and Duncan Van Bergen from Calyx Global probably 6 months ago on the show with Eddie. And they were talking about this category, and then they kind of labeled it the ugly ducklings of the carbon market, right? Because their own internal analysis yielded yielded the outcome that said, in terms of the distribution of high rated projects, super pollutants are disproportionately ranked a lot higher than across the rest of the market. They may lack the kind of charismatic story around biodiversity and economic impacts or community impacts. But from a science perspective, avoiding these tons going into the atmosphere is a material win for the climate. And as a result, they were rating them pretty highly, right? And so they were wanting to shine the light again on this category in order to incentivize more and more participants coming in. I suspect that maybe they kicked off that butterfly effect with some of these big corporates now coming in. What are your thoughts on that statement, and specifically, how are you seeing the distribution of your projects, but also more broadly, those from your peers being reflected across ratings, whether that be Silvera, BZ?
Yeah, we first of all, I think you're right. It is. I would say it's not unimpeachable. because we still have to be super diligent about the penchants, the pillars around quality and credibility. And we're super diligent about that. Most of the folks on my team are engineers and will continue to be engineers. And they talk a language that sometimes I don't really even understand. They're brilliant folks, but we have to be diligent around things like additionality. Where I think we have a really good story is around permanence, that probably the smart folks at B0 and Calyx and Silvera and others who have given us really high ratings, or given our category, I should say, really high ratings. But there are still issues, that we have to make sure that we're diligent about around additionality, around permanence, around data. The first thing we did when we built this company, which was a passion of mine, is my colleague who runs operations for us built a really robust data collection and data credibility baseline for our business. We call it Thermware. Crazy. But anyway.
I like that name, actually. Thermware.
Firmware. Yeah, I know. It's kind of crazy. But anyway, we built it because that credibility around data is really important. And if you can imagine, Rene, for a large grocer that has 2,000 grocery stores and takes leak detection, ratings, right? Or monitoring reports every single month, those can be millions of pieces of data. And to input that data, to manage it credibly, to be able to display it and summarize it and build inference around it, doesn't just take smart people, and AI can't do it alone. It takes a really, really robust system to be able to prove to the good folks at B0 and others and more importantly, not just B0 and others, but the folks who actually are the acquirers of these, like the Googles and the JP Morgans, they have to have confidence in it. And the confidence comes from, the really
the
tough
rigor
work. So I would say that you're right. It's easier than maybe the good folks in the nature-based solution, the NBSs, but the amount of data that we're required to, and what we found with, especially with Google, is that they dug so deep into what those systems look like, what procedures are associated with our larger categories, super pollutants and refrigerants specifically, and that curiosity, and that no one knows data better than Google, right? And others,
exactly.
and tech companies, Salesforce and others. So what we won't do is we won't compromise that credibility or that advantage that we have, because we're really good at managing and building inference around those millions of data points that we have to manage.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I didn't want to say it's like it was easy. Maybe the use of the word detail was incorrect. I'll retract that later. Can I give you an opportunity to talk your own book, and specifically with regards to the ratings? I believe that Therm has received A and also AA ratings from B0 Carbon, which I think places you really in the top, I think maybe top 2 or 3% of projects globally. I'll have to fact check that. Maybe you know the details, but can you just talk to us and about sort of what are the specific aspects of refrigerant projects that drive those high ratings? I think you touch on some of those just in the previous response. Walk us through that, and then walk us through, what does that signal about where the VCM should be allocating capital, right? So let's talk your own book and then kind of talk about.
So like you said, we've been fortunate with those ratings you described, mostly from B0, also from Calyx, and we've had great interaction with the B0 folks, and in their questions and their highly intelligent queries around how we get to issuance, right? And what that quality is. What I think you come back to is, I'll go back to the penetration rates to emphasize additionality. It's really important to be, and I'd add our registry ACR, who's been super diligent around managing additionality, not just on a one and done basis, but on a continuous basis, right? What is happening every year related to uptake, for example, in ammonia refrigeration or in CO2 refrigeration uptake. And so they've done a really good job at monitoring that and understanding specifically, because it is kind of an esoteric category and it's hard to get. We pour over, Rene, things like NAICS data, right? Which is, government data and EPA data around penetration rates. And so it is really, really detailed information that we think is really important, and that the ratings agencies like B0 and others and the registries, whether it's Vera or ACR, we work with both, um, have really done I think, a really good job. And there's a thing I think that's you're pointing towards is that because we've been so diligent around supporting and building strength and a foundation around this additionality data, it gives more confidence, and we get better ratings, both from the buyers and from the agencies. And that's where I think the core comes from. It's not just how we handle data and where it goes and whether it's credible. And for example, we get information about EPA certification of technicians that work on these systems, right? And we have to have their actual EPA cards, right? That
Yep.
they're registered to work on these systems, and all that has to be quantified, all that has to be digitized, all that has to be memorialized, because we want to make sure that if there ever is an issue, that we have the credible data, the credible information that can support the issuance that we have in the category.
But that's just an example of solid systems because you're under so much scrutiny in terms of the due diligence, right? From the buy side. And obviously you've built those systems in advance of that. It's just good management. But having that demonstrates why you'd be at that top decile, let's say, but certainly potentially a lot higher in terms of the ratings, in terms of the market. So that's great. Can I rewind and just go back to something that you said earlier, which I found really interesting? I don't want to gloss over, but you said, unlike CO2, right? When it's obviously emitted into the atmosphere and it is measured in terms of global warming potential, or let's say that 100-year warming potential, there is the potential for removal of that carbon from the atmosphere. We have both nature-based and then technological solutions for the removal of carbon with various different degrees due to the entropy of the system. But as it relates to refrigerants, as you said, the chemistry, there just isn't the potential to remove them once they're in the atmosphere. Can you sort of, I don't want to gloss over that. And I think you gave us a little bit of commentary on that before, but you know, just I want to double click on that. Can you just elaborate a little bit further on that?
Yeah. I'm
it's
happy
important.
to. I'm glad you're emphasizing the point, Renee. Thank you. So the fluorine is and I'm not a scientist. I'm not a chemist, but obviously this is a passion of ours, of mine. And we have engineers that could be much more eloquent in description, but it's this fluorinated gas aspect. So it's really difficult to pull that out of the atmosphere. And I'm just going to expand the question if I can take a little bit more license, but so it's virtually impossible. Science tells us that it's virtually impossible to, unfortunately, pull these super pollutants out of the air. The other issue, I think, as I expand your question, maybe beyond what you meant, but so there's a lot of work going on to say, well, once these gases are through their useful life, let's destroy them. Let's burn them in ovens, EPA and AHRI certified destruction facilities, in order to permanently remove them from the ecosystem. We think those are great solutions. And in a lot of cases, especially in Article 5 global South countries, that's a great solution. And as we said before, we believe that there's something like 20 times more, a tremendous amount more of environmental effect through the operating life of these assets. So we think that the combination of those things is really important. Stop it before it gets started, especially in the global South, where there's that 3.7% penetration rate is virtually zero in the rest of the world. And their answer when they're done or they have a leaky system is, don't fix it, just buy more gas. Or at the end of the system's life, just vent it, open it up and vent it. And so we're really focused now on shifting our effort, Renee, from North America, where we've got, we have a pretty dominant position right now, and moving globally, and specifically interested in the global South and Article 5 countries, because and a lot of those, unfortunately, because of climate change, for example, in North America, a lot of the production of produce is now moving to Central America and South America. And what does that mean? Refrigeration, right? We've got to refrigerate it, transport it over many, many more miles. And those global South, for example, cold storage warehouses are popping up all over Central America and South America, because unfortunately, the California basin is not feeding the nation like it once did. And because of arid conditions, a lack of water. And so it's sort of unfortunately negative reinforcing cycles. We want to now take that solution and incent folks in, for example, in South America and Latin America, and where there's 0% penetration rate, and start to make a difference there. So as they build out that infrastructure, they don't make the decision to use these terrible short-term high GWP gases in their refrigeration systems. So that's our next phase, is to take it beyond just North America and try and bring carbon financing good decisions, make them good economic decisions as well as good environmental decisions.
Great. And I think that's fantastic, because then you've got a larger total addressable market, and you can basically transfer that technology to different locations to address this pernicious problem. You were talking about AI earlier, and I couldn't resist the temptation. I asked you that question, and I was, as you said, there are far more qualified engineers out there that would be able to provide us with a very eloquent answer. I'm just going to take liberty here of just telling what answered when I asked it the question that I asked you around why it's not possible to pull some super pollutants out from the air, and it gives a very, very simple set of solutions and a number of points. But it basically says HFCs are present in the atmosphere. It's just super low concentrations, measured in parts per billion or per trillion, whereas other gases like methane and CO2 are in parts per million. So obviously they're just far more diffuse in the atmosphere, and ultimately trying to extract those molecules from the atmosphere when they're fewer and far between from a vast ocean of air, essentially, it's just more thermodynamically difficult. The other thing is that chemistry of it, apparently they're designed to be stable and inert. So unlike CO2, that they don't react or bind with minerals like carbonic acid in the oceans, etc. So they don't have any easy capture pathway. And then the third thing, which is what you talked about, is essentially from an infrastructure perspective, they're diffuse. They're not in one point source. It's not like a large coal-fired power plant that's emitting the CO2 in one large location that can obviously be avoided with a sort of energy transition kind of play. But instead, it's like you said, 40,000 or thousands of different sources from refrigerants in different locations. It had a few other points, but I found that to be interesting, so I wanted to just share that with the audience.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Thank you for that.
It's a very powerful tool to have in your pocket, isn't it? To have AI just ask a
It
question
really
in the
is.
background, just reads it.
Yeah,
It's
and
pretty cool.
AI for us has been great in terms of, for example, scraping data off of those
I bet.
thousands and thousands and thousands of things like legends and leak detection reports and all that kind of stuff. It's been we are all in on
there's a lot of power in terms of we could have an entire episode talking about AI, but around impacts on climate and also the potential impacts on society, etc. But it is a great unlock. It's such an important tool that now we've been able to harness and utilize, because essentially it compresses time, because we're effectively commoditizing intelligence, and that's a conversation for another day. But because we have this tool at our disposal, and we can effectively glean insight from really complex data sets, but very, very quickly, we can do more in far shorter time scale. So to your point, historically, you'd have to take the manual data, digitize it, then try to pass out the information through pivot tables and some other sort of means, and try to glean those insights and run your own algorithms kind of thing on it. But now you can throw that data into an LLM and effectively be able to get those insights. It's just really powerful, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. And now with agents, etc., it's really incredible the things that are actually happening and being able to be unlocked. There's a lot of use cases in the real world for these things. So I'm really glad to hear that it's an enabling tool for you. Just conscious of time, but hopefully we can just touch on a few other topics if you'll let me. Firstly, it's just sort of a reflection on Therm itself. I had a chat with your team that I referenced a little while ago, and I found quite interesting the fact that from a business model, you don't seem to have the concentration risk that a lot of other project developers have. You've referenced the voluntary carbon market a number of times in that conversation, and that's clearly one channel to market that you all have. But correct me if I'm wrong here, but my understanding is that you guys are also involved in compliance systems, most notably in Canada, but also across scope 3 insetting.
Yes.
Can you talk about this sort of multi-channel strategy? Because I think, it's certainly when we speak to project developers, their entire business model is, and some of them, and we've had some very well publicized cases recently in our media, which is unfortunate, but around project developers that were banking on a certain outcome, and they put kind of all their chips on one outcome. In this case, you've distributed that risk according to different markets, and therefore you have different price signals. Talk to me about the strategy there, and how you've been able to effectively unlock those different channels for distribution.
It's a great question. We've diversified our business. As I mentioned, we started behind one methodology. Now I think we have, I don't know, a dozen that we're working on across multiple registries. But the insetting part, so if you look at our business, we have voluntary markets, we have compliance markets, and we have insetting. And just to give your audience a little, certainly an intelligent audience, but to give a little bit of context to that, what's an inset? What's an offset? An offset is a sort of a ubiquitous issuance of a reduction ton of carbon, right? That can be sold to anybody, right? So in the food supply chain, that could be for a myriad of different reasons, can come from a myriad of different sources. Insetting is very specific within what we call the supply shed of a buyer. So if a buyer says, look, I've got a scope 3 emissions goal, which many of them have, right? 2030 is coming up, and that's usually where the interim goal hits. I think our friends at Pure Strategies were saying that a very low percentage of folks who have scope 3 emissions are actually on track to meet those 2030 goals. So you got this gap, right? You got the scope 3 gap. And what these folks, specifically in our category, like food manufacturers, right? They would much rather keep their carbon finance investments inside their supply shed. So as an example, investing in farmers' actions, right? And in order to, who are in their supply chain, who sell them all of their different inputs, whether it's animals or corn, wheat, soybeans, whatever it might be, inside their supply chain. But that also is really interesting. And they'd rather keep that money within their own supply chain to support them. The other thing that's really interesting is that they have way more confidence, because big manufacturers and big food folks, they have the engineering acumen because they understand their supply chain like nobody else does. They can have a verified emission reduction ton as opposed to a carbon credit that they can have super high confidence in, that stays within their supply shed and is incenting the people that are part of that supply shed. There are two categories that are really interesting for us within that supply shed, within insetting. One is upstream and one is downstream. Upstream is farmers, processors, suppliers. But what's interesting is a lot of the manufacturers now are thinking about downstream. And so downstream would be the cold storage suppliers, the retailers, and they are also part of the scope 3 world, upstream and downstream. So whereas things like land use, agricultural land use and ag improvements have typically been where the insetting activities have occurred, that's shifting, right? And the understanding that downstream with things like refrigerants, for example, are really important to also consider and try and eliminate and interject into these decisions that are being made on the downstream side too. So we've seen a real shift of folks who are now interested not only in the upstream work, which we do a lot of, but also in the downstream work. And from a business standpoint, Renee, you hit it right on the head. So diversifying your business across multiple categories just makes a more resilient business. We can add more solutions, which those customers that I rang up 6 years ago, buyers that I rang up 6 years ago really appreciate. And I'm thankful for that, very thankful for that. But it also allows us to have a more resilient business should one of those pillars, should one of those categories become less interesting.
Thank you on that around insetting. And it goes back to the resilience piece, right? Like companies are, and to paraphrase what you said, interested in investing in their own supply chain. I love this notion around upstream and downstream, because the supply chain is a chain. And so there are impacts at any point in that chain will have effects certainly downstream. You don't want to just be looking at what's coming upstream. You need to also be looking downstream in terms of your actions and having those bonds and relationships with basically your customer makes a lot of sense, not just taking advantage of the leverage that the customer has with its supplier. So that's really interesting. But to your point, ultimately it helps to build that resilience in that supply chain. It helps to build those incentives and those bonds in order to continue looking at those emissions within their own ledger. It's a very logical space. Talk so much around insetting, and certainly from our perspective at Valaterra on a day-to-day work, we don't do it. We don't do any insetting today, but maybe we should, in the interest of diversifying our business, take a leaf out of your book and start to look into it. So I'll put that little anecdote aside and discuss it with my partners tomorrow. I had, and I'm sure that they'll listen to this one and find that funny. I keep coming up with an interesting list of things we should do, and they just like focus, Rene, focus. But I had an interesting conversation with Stephanie Zhu from Yum Brands, who's an old friend of mine. She was climate manager at Delta Airlines for a long, long time, and had the privilege of working with her there. But when she was on the show talking about the sort of transition of her work from aviation into food, she talked about the insetting potential and how that was her focus, right? Around what impact could she, as a buyer of these inputs, whether that's protein or other inputs, could they have with their suppliers, and obviously a preference to keep everything within their supply chain was one of the key things that she mentioned. So thank you again for that discussion around insetting, because I think it's very, very pertinent. I know we've gone a little bit over time, so I'm just conscious of that. But potentially, can I just ask you, as we close out here, sort of what's next in your world? So the Therm's really well positioned. You've got this top tier B0 ratings and these proven methodologies, and you've got this diverse business around voluntary compliance and the insetting channels. But what's next in terms of your business evolution, and where are you looking towards over the next few years? As you said, 2030 is coming up very, very soon, but 2030 and then beyond is the question.
Just curious. So there are a couple of areas that we're really interested in that we think will have an outsized impact, right? So, one is, and I mentioned this, is a focus beyond. We've gotten pretty good at solutions within the voluntary carbon market within the North America, for example, developed countries, and have sort of, I wouldn't say perfected the process, but we've gotten pretty good at it. So the one thing I'd say, Rene, is that back to that Article 5 Global South, we realize that there's a massive problem outside of the border of the super developed, industrialized Western countries that we want to be a part of. And there are other folks doing great work in that space. People like, as you know, Tradewater is doing really good work in destroying refrigerants and now orphan wells, and really great company run by great founders. But we believe that as they have, where they have a global footprint for destruction of refrigerants, that we think our solution around sort of stopping it before it can be destroyed is important. And it's really important because as the global south develops, they're going to use more and more refrigeration. There's no doubt about that. And they're growing it from a refrigeration standpoint, from an HVAC standpoint, they're growing at a astronomical rate. And if we can intercede in those decisions early on and put carbon finance to work to make those economic decisions positive, not to say, look, you have to pay a premium for a carbon friendly solution for refrigeration or HVAC. We want to intercede there. So that's international, right? Second thing is back to insets. We believe that insetting, because of this 2030 issue and 2030 problem with our partners, our buyers, is an area that we're also going to focus on in a big way. And we'll expand our capabilities within that. We'll expand the folks that are interested in looking upstream and downstream, but we'll also look at way more solutions in their supply shed. And the reason that that's really important, well, go back to that data problem, right? When you get to insetting, being really efficient at managing, at curating, at executing related to data within a supply shed. As an example, charting that supply shed to understand shelf space and for supply, as it relates to suppliers, to the ultimate downstream sale of those products is really important, but it's very difficult. And it's hard to do that. And we want to solve those hard problems so that insetting can become easier. And we've got a head start because of our relationship with the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of grocers and retailers across North America right now. that head start, we believe, gives us an unfair advantage in being able to penetrate that in setting, because that data advantage that we already have, that we've already been working with these folks for years and years, allows us a couple of steps of an advantage, we think. So I see those two things as our major push in the future. We'll continue with the voluntary carbon market. It's been great for us. We'll keep expanding methodologies to improve our moat. Things like leak detection, things like reclaim, and others will continue to be important solutions. But I think those two are the most important for Therm's future.
That's fantastic. Just one thought that I had when you're talking about Article 5, and I had a feeling that, again, we're talking inside baseball, inside carbon here. Oftentimes people might think that we're talking about Article 5 in Paris Agreement, but we're not. You're talking about Article 5 within the Montreal Protocol, as it relates to it. You said countries, so it's the WHO, right? In terms of who gets a special treatment, and it's those developing countries in the global south that have the extended timelines and funding for the destruction of these ozone depleting substances and gases, right? And we contrast that to the Article 5 in the Paris Agreement. Obviously in carbon we tend to focus around Article 6 because it's the trading article, but in Paris Agreement Article 5 it's related to RED Plus. But that's a conversation for another day. I just wanted to clarify that in case anybody's interested or confused, because I do get a lot of WhatsApp and then also LinkedIn messages from folks who are like, hey, I had no idea what the hell you guys are talking about. Can you just please explain?
Thank you.
I wanted to put that side note in there so I don't have to answer that email.
I rolled right over that, so I appreciate the clarification.
No, that's good. Again, just being a nerd. Cool. Hey, Fritz, that was really, really fabulous. Thank you so much. I learned so much and I really enjoyed our conversation. I want to thank you again for your time, and would love to stay in touch and just kind of see where things are going with you and your team. And we'll do that, obviously, commercially, but I'd like to invite you back on the show another time. So thank you again for your time. Really appreciate it. And wishing you a wonderful, afternoon for you.
Yeah, thank you. And Rene, I'm just thankful that you've become just a really great voice for our industry. We should all be thankful that you have these sessions and you educate us all. So I'm very thankful for it. Thanks for being a voice in our industry.
That's very kind. Thank you. I take that as a great compliment. Again, trying to justify this to my business partners is sometimes a very funny situation. I had an old friend, a little anecdote, just to let you go. It's a bit funny. I caught up with an old friend of mine. I won't name who, and I won't give away too much, but he's a trader in carbon markets, has been for a very long time. I won't say where he worked, because it'll probably reduce it down to just a small number of folks. It's a pretty large desk. Let's just call it that way. He said to me, "Hey, man, so you a podcaster now?" And I said, "No, that's my night gig." I'm running a principal trading firm. There's no money in podcasting, right? It's just a distribution channel in terms of the content piece, and I do it just for an educational perspective. The reason why I started in this is I'm really passionate. I really love this industry, obviously, and it was my love letter to the market initially when we launched the Carbon Exposure Project. Yeah. What started out as a bit of I had a little bit of time in between when I finished up at Expansive, and I was kind of thinking about what was next, and like you, wanted to scratch that entrepreneur's itch. That led to what is Valiterra today. I thought, I have a sense of obligation to want to just have so much access to folks just in the day to day. And I started feeling guilty that I had access that was effectively unparalleled. And so I wanted to share that with a broader audience. And that was the impetus for it, right? And so I decided to put a camera in front of me and basically record it. And then what I realized is I can't just keep doing that in a sit down one-on-one with people, because it effectively limits the number of people that I get to speak to. So that's why we moved into this show here, to have international folks, have the access and have the platform to be able to share their thoughts and their lessons with a broader audience. I find it really entertaining, but also enjoyable, and it just helps me to stay current with regards to the state of the art of what's happening in the world. And it's kind of inserted myself into a really interesting vantage point. So now I feel a continued sense of obligation to continue to do it. I tried to, obviously leverage the fact that I've got a young and very intelligent person working with me, Eddie Smith, who's also incredibly curious. And I, said, "Hey man, why don't you take over this platform?" But it is a lot of work. There are some late nights, but it's fun. It's fun, man. And I wouldn't do it if it wasn't fun. So
You have the combination of intellectual curiosity, which I think is rare, and you also have great
No, intellectual
relationships.
curiosity is very common. There's a lot of really, really way smarter people than me who are far more curious and apply it to far more profitable things.
I think you're being humble,
I just,
but
no, I just have what you and all other successful entrepreneurs have is a trait that I don't know when to stop, man. I just got to keep going. It's like even if you get knocked down, I just keep coming back. It's I just keep getting up every single day and being eternally positive. Yeah, so that's it. And no matter what happens, in every crisis there's an opportunity, and so in this crisis that we've had as an industry, there was an opportunity to improve our communication. I jumped in, and I hopefully encourages people that are far more qualified and competent as communicators to take on the baton and run with it.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Good stuff. Hey, Fritz, thanks again for your time. I really, really appreciate it. And wishing you and your team continued success. And to our audience, thank you for tuning in. That's our latest episode of This Week in Carbon. Hope you enjoyed it. If you've got any comments, please do let us know in terms of the social media channels across Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts. And if you haven't followed us, please do subscribe and hit that like button. So thanks again. Cheers.